Welcome into another Monday Market Update. I am Zach Thomas. Glad you're here today. Hey, listen, it is July 24th, and in 2 weeks here in Arlington, our kids start back to school. Wow, 2 weeks. 10 weeks of summer, 8 weeks have passed. We now have 2 weeks to go. I don't know if I'm excited or if I'm sad about that. I think a little bit of both. Hey, listen, before I get started real fast, last week I had my days mixed up. The Fed is actually meeting this week, not last week. So ignore everything I said. Well, don't ignore it, but just throw out the whole idea of like, oh, we're going to see what the Fed does. Well, we're actually going to see what the Fed does this week. Are they going to signal more rate increases coming in the future? Or are they going to just raise by a quarter point this time and leave it alone? I don't know. We'll see. However, because last week didn't bring much economic news, mortgage rates basically stayed the same. They fluctuated within about 10 basis points, but overall, they were pretty much the same all throughout last week. I have a feeling that's going to change a little bit this week, however, so stay tuned. All right, let's get into it. Number one, I'm going to read off of my list today because there's a lot to cover, and if I don't read it, I'm going to get off track. So here we go. Number one, we have discussed ad nauseum the shortage of inventory on the market, and Memphis currently sits around 2 months of inventory. National numbers came out this past week. They show 3 months of inventory nationally. So that means that Memphis is faring better than the rest of the country on average. But here's the thing, 2 months of inventory is low. So what can we do to address this? I have an idea. But it would be a drastic change that impacts lending significantly. But to me, it makes sense. My idea is this: make conventional loans assumable. Currently, all government-backed loans, FHA, VA, USDA loans are assumable. Well, that means that a buyer can qualify through the lender that holds the mortgage currently, assume that current mortgage's interest rate, which typically is below 4%, and pay the difference in the purchase price with cash or take out a second mortgage. Well, this allows the seller then to also trade their low rate currently for another low rate because most sellers don't want to sell their home and lose their rate. So by making conventional loans assumable, now you can provide more lateral movement from sellers, puts more inventory on the market. And they also can pay the difference with the equity in their home, or they can take out a second mortgage at a current rate of today. So it allows struggling first-time home buyers that keep getting pushed out of the market because of affordability issues to assume a new mortgage at a lower price point, which makes it more affordable to buy. And it allows lateral movement, as I stated, and it opens up homes in all price points, but especially in the price points that are in the sub $400,000 range, which is currently severely low. So if I were to be running for president right now, my campaign slogan would be, make conventional loans assumable. I'm Zach Thomas, and I approve this message. Okay, number two, the labor force has shrunk significantly. It only is 1%, but prior to COVID, we had 1% greater workers in our country. That impacts our inflation numbers. Let me explain. 1% is nearly 2.75 million workers. Those workers are not coming back. Long-form COVID, some died to COVID and then took early retirement. They're not coming back into the labor force. And I've said this before, the pandemic and the amount of cash that we put into our economy over such a short time period upended all traditional models, economic models of the past. Your conventional and typical indicators do not tell the story this time around. So, how can you fill those 2.75 million jobs without drastically increasing wages? You have to increase the supply of workers. Well, what increases the supply of workers? Immigration. Yeah, so allowing more people into the United States and giving them green cards and worker visas allows us to offset a little of the loss in production, which will hopefully offset the increase in inflation because it will reduce the need to pay workers a higher wage to attract them, which then reduces as well the number of people who have more money that are putting it into our economy, raising core inflation. See, core inflation remains higher because new patterns were developed during COVID that have not been changed. Okay, and since we're not backing off of our habits, we continue to demand products that are not being supplied enough into the marketplace. And the Fed, you see, they only have one tool in their toolbox, and that's to manipulate rates. That's the only thing they're going to be doing right now. So they're going to manipulate rates up or down. But that's a rear-facing metric. It's based on past data. So even then, though, the rate isn't the issue. It's not de-incentivizing spending, but the issue is that we need to increase production. We have a shortage of materials in many sectors of our economy, which is why many companies, rather than laying people off, have decided to cut hours and marginally increase pay. That way, when demand is needed, they can quickly ramp up production or reduce labor to offset weakened demand. I read an article this week that talked about that. It was saying, in the past, you would see people like freeze hiring, and then they would decrease worker hours, and then they would lay people off, and then we're signaling a recession. But that conventional model, that thinking just doesn't apply right now because we're still in a shortage of workers, even though worker hours have decreased. So I think what's happening is people are like, listen, we've got to hire more people, but let's just decrease hours rather than lay people off. But we still need more people. So rather than overworking our people, let's give them a better quality of life. Some people are working from home. They're voluntarily taking reduced hours. And that's what has led us into the economy that we're in today. But I do think it's got to change because our birth rate is only 1.64 per woman. So in 2020, our birth rate was 1.64 per woman. So that tells me that we are declining as a population. And the only way to offset the demands that we still have as a country is through immigration. So some people are like, yeah, great, legal immigration. I hear you. I agree. I also think that there's a calculated risk taking place in our country of let's let more people into the country who then will take jobs that a lot of Americans aren't willing to do. Anyway, different conversation for a different day maybe. Okay, now let me pivot a little bit and talk about culture. I don't know about you, but I am really getting exhausted with every popular cultural thing being a referendum one way or the other about something else. First, it was Bud Light. Then came Sound of Freedom. And then Barbie. And now Jason Aldean. And it's just like, oh my goodness, guys, can we not just be entertained? Can we not just live our life? Does every single thing have to be dramatic and overblown into some major catastrophe or major let's ramp up and boycott them or let's cancel them or whatever? It's like, look, I'm against bigotry and hate speech. Every single thing said or done today has become exaggerated into the most offensive thing ever done. I'm just tired of it. I'm exhausted. I'm weary. Because when moments come where we really need to be putting forth efforts to stop injustice, everyone is tapped out. And most people are exhausted from fighting these fake culture wars that just don't matter. You see, my plea with you, if you're watching this and you're one of these people that get entangled in this, is to refrain from joining those fake culture wars and reserve your energy and your voice for things that really impact people's daily lives and our future. And finally, I wanted to make mention of a study that I recently read that addresses anxiety and a potential cure to it. The cure is actually gratitude or thanksgiving. And I'm not intending to make light of chronic depression and chemical imbalances that lead to this chronic disease of depression that some people have and anxiety. But instead, I'm focusing more on the day-to-day stress of life that may impact our ability to be at peace with ourselves, our family, and others. The same part of the brain, this is the study, the same part of the brain that sends neurotransmitters to acknowledge anxiety is also that which acknowledges gratitude. The two cannot coexist. And it's incredible to consider because I believe it is imperative for us to start every day and maybe multiple times a day to intentionally stop, take a few minutes, and write out and verbally say what we're grateful for in that moment. Just think about that. You cannot have anxiety and gratitude at the same time. Those things cannot coexist. So this study says that a single act thoughtful, intentional gratitude can reduce depressive symptoms by 35%. That's incredible, y'all. So here's the thing. I'm going to work on making this a habit in my life each day. And I encourage you, do the same. Message me. Let me know, what are you grateful for? And let's talk about that. Then maybe we can retrain our brains to focus on the positive things that we have in our lives rather than focusing on the negative. That's all I got today. Happy Monday. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.